Welcome to Bear Archery's Hunting 101 podcast, where hunters new and old come to learn and find inspiration from stories of hunts gone by. Everyone is welcome to enjoy the outdoor way of life, and there is no better time to start than right now. So let's head into the great outdoors with your host, Dylan Ray.
All right, guys, welcome to Bear Archery's Hunting 101 podcast. As always, presented by our good friends over at ScentLock. I'll tell you what really changed my mind about ScentLock was their carbon technology, and the way that it will help you cover up and eliminate your odor to get you more successful days in the field. Guys, go check out ScentLock because they have an incredible lineup of products to get you all the way from early season to late season. I have a special guest on, Mr. Brian Butcher. Brian, how are you, man?
I'm good. I'm excited for season. I feel like we're right around the corner.
Oh yeah, man. I tell everybody, I really get fired up for whitetail hunting in Kansas about Halloween. Maybe the 30th, and but really that Halloween weekend, man, it just starts kicking off.
Yeah. The action is just starting to pick up. I talked to a couple of buddies that were actually out in the woods yesterday, and they had mentioned starting to see a couple of bucks, chasing the does. The does weren't having it, but it's like the bucks are starting to get ready. I feel like this next week could turn out pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was actually down at Liberty Ranch there in Oklahoma hunting, and it was a week ago, and I saw a buck full on chasing a doe, and I was like, man, that's a little early, but but I mean, hey, it happens different every year. But no, ever since I guess 3 years ago, it was the morning of the 30th, and right at first light, I kicked off a grunt, and I had a buck at underneath my tree stand at first light, and I ended up shooting that buck, and so now really the 30th, 31st of October has really become my favorite time to be in the woods, especially in Kansas, because I mean, you're only an hour and a half from me.
Yeah.
When the rut really gets kicked off, it's actually hard hunting just because the bucks are going nuts.
It's
But
chaos.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's literally it's insane. It's so fun to be in the woods, but it's so hard to nail one down, just because they're running rampant. I mean, they're going crazy.
Yeah.
And they're so hot on does that your grunts and your rattles that they could care less, because they're on a
Yeah.
doe already. But really the pre-rut in Kansas is my favorite time to hunt, man, because grunts and rattles, they respond so well. I'll run a couple decoys and they respond really well to decoys because they're just getting fired up, but the does aren't ready yet. And so it's the perfect time for me, at least. I don't know what experience you have there, though.
Yeah, I mean, I used to always believe in that October lull, but as years have gone on, I feel like the lull isn't really a lull. It's just a transition period. And I'll be the first to say I had two incredible hunts last October. I didn't get the buck I was after, but, you know, I observed him. I made some different moves, and he survived the year last year. And it was October 23rd and October 30th. It was 1 week apart on both of those hunts, but the buck was kind of doing the same thing where he's kind of coming from where he's bedding. The does are coming from a different direction, and I was able to kind of catch him there in the middle at a food source. And with him alive, I haven't had many pictures of him this year, but I feel like be best to be in the woods this week. The temperatures aren't too appealing, but they could be worse.
Well, last year in October, man, you know as well as I do, we had that crazy cold snap.
It was
I mean, it was
it was
snowing
the
on
best October we've had.
oh my Lord. I remember going out and I was hunting a blind, which I really don't enjoy doing, but I was hunting in a blind and I unzipped the windows and there was a giant bedded down like 40 yards from me. And I'm like, holy cow. And I told my wife, and really the backside of the cold front was going to be incredible. And it was like on a Tuesday, and Tuesday mornings just really don't work out for me to hunt well, just because of the wife's schedule and
It's good.
getting the kids to school and stuff. And so I was like, well, I better not go. I just better not do that. I need to save my time for the rut. And
Hmm.
and I had my number one hit list buck on the camera that Tuesday morning, and I was like, "You got to
Oh.
be kidding me!" But that's the best advice I can possibly give anyone. Is October is a hard time to hunt. I mean, it's really a hard time to nail down bucks. But if you have a cold front come in October, be in the woods for sure,
Absolutely. Yeah.
for sure. I mean, that was probably as long as I've lived in Kansas. That was the earliest I had ever seen that type of cold. I mean, it was snowing in like 30, in October, and I was like, "This is insane."
Yeah, and I wanna say it was a fairly early snow in October. I mean, it
Yeah,
wasn't
I believe
the
it was
last
probably
day, but
yeah, I believe it was probably 16th to the 20th, somewhere in
yeah,
there, late to
yeah.
mid. But yeah, I mean, just watch the weather in October. Some people completely write off October, but watch the weather in October, and if you get a cold front, be in the woods. I mean, that's just the best I can tell you. Now we got way ahead of ourselves.
I mean, just to back up real quick, I know we're jumping around, but I mean, you mentioned the difficulty of hunting the rut. I mean, that's when, if you've got a buck on camera or, he's in the area, I think you got to try to get him before the rut because it's just as likely that he bails and, goes off to the neighbors and chases some other does or something. Not to
Yeah,
say they all do, but it is chaos, and you also have the benefit of seeing some bucks that you never have seen before as well.
yeah. No, man. Which again, we'll loop back here in a minute for introductions because we got off track. But um, I remember last year I was talking to a buddy from down south, and it was the middle of our rut, and I was like, "Dude, I saw like 16 bucks this morning." He's like, "You didn't shoot one?" And I'm like, "You don't understand Kansas, man. They'll be running through the woods at 40 mile an hour. I mean, just I mean,
It,
hauling through the woods."
and it's the one time a year that you're going to hear that buck coming before you see it. I mean, it seems
Yeah,
like any other time of the year, they surprise you. And I had a hunt probably 3 years ago, and I thought a dog was coming in because it was panting so hard. And this beat up 10 point, missing half his antlers comes in. I mean, I could hear him panting just like he had run a marathon. Comes in, comes right underneath me, goes down by the draw, and just lays down in the water. And I thought maybe he'd been shot. I didn't see anything. And about 2 minutes later, he gets back up, gets out of the water, and just kind of moves on and keeps on his path. It was the wildest thing.
yeah. I mean, you see some crazy stuff, man. And I think what it is in Kansas there's so little timber, at least in a lot of places that you just see them. If you're hunting a field edge, you see them just running and gunning through these fields, and I mean, it's an insane time to be in the woods. But it's also, like I said, that week leading up to pre-rut is my favorite time to hunt because you can really get bucks to respond well to grunts and rattles and decoys and so I really love that early time. That first, the 31st to like the 7th or 8th, I'm cold calling like every 30 minutes. And it's
Hmm.
insane the amount of deer that I have come in off a cold call of a grunt. And man, I grew up, with a dad that taught me silent, 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 silence, be quiet, don't move. And so I remember like deciding, well, I'm going to start cold calling, and just thinking to myself, I'm like, this is so wrong. Like, you shouldn't be doing this. You're going to scare off so many deer that's just right around the corner. And uh and then it was just an incredible response. And I understand different states are different. I understand they don't function that way all the time, but I've experienced it in Texas, Oklahoma, uh Kansas, a little bit in Arkansas, and that first, the pre-rut, man, they will respond so well to calls. And I find myself, you hit that grunt call, and then 2 minutes later, you've got a buck underneath your stand. It's crazy.
Yeah, you got to be ready.
It's crazy, man. Now, we did get off track. We've got Brian Butcher, which, if you don't know who Brian Butcher is, get out from underneath your rock. Dude holds the number two archery deer in the world, an insane deer, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I got to meet him at the Pope and Young convention this year. I got to see that deer in person, and just an incredible buck. So if you haven't seen the buck, then welcome to the hunting world, because I don't know how you missed it. But the thing had a bush on its head. Brian, run me through the story of that buck, because I heard it one time and it was actually pretty comical the way it went down with your buddies having to go do something else and not getting to hunt. So walk
Yeah.
me through the story of that giant, man.
Yeah. It was a kind of a strange year in the sense that I usually hunt with two of my buddies, Luke and Clint. That summer had been busy. Usually we're out doing a bunch of work and stuff, moving stands, prepping, things like that. We hadn't really done it that summer. And so we had gone out October 2nd, I believe. And the idea is we were just going to kind of put in an observation sit, basically, to just try to do some scouting out there. And while we were out there, Clint ended up dropping a plastic tub of some of his calls off the four-wheeler. And anyway, he lost them. He was wanting to get back out there, and another October, and the cold front was coming in, and we go from probably an average high of 70 mid-October, and the high was probably, I think it was high 50s. The lows were down into the 40s, not cold, but drastic enough change. And so I was able to get out on Friday, October 11th, and I met Clint. We went out and we found his calls, and I had plans to hunt that afternoon. Clint had to go back for a softball, what do you say, a bonfire or something. And my plans were to hunt in a draw over some acorns. And when we went to go get his calls and we were close enough to look, cattle had got out of the pasture and they were all over where I had intended to hunt. And so we go over to another area, kind of the opposite end of the property, and we had moved a stand that week before when we were out there, but we hadn't trimmed any shooting lanes. So Clint goes over there and he helped me trim out some shooting lanes, and wasn't thinking much of it being the first hunt of the year, and he ends up leaving. I ended up staying in the stand where we had trimmed out those shooting lanes, and I mean, it was probably 20 minutes into my hunt and had a buck come in, and he kind of milled around. He was actually eating some of the leaves off of the limbs that we had trimmed down. He worked out of the way, and next thing I know, if you haven't seen the deer, you got to see it, because it doesn't look like what you're expecting to come walking through the woods. But it was basically a spike buck, and then this buck came in, and I didn't have any true history with this buck, but anyway, he starts working closer to me, and I probably saw him for the first time at 45 to 60 yards. And as he came in, he ended up turning, and he was about 25 yards away from me. And I kind of realized that those were antlers, because it doesn't look like your typical frame by any means. And got a broadside shot at 25 yards, let it go. I was excited. I wasn't sure what I was going to walk up to. And anyway, I waited probably 15 minutes, which I was ready to climb down as soon as I shot it, just because I felt pretty confident about the shot. And anyway, I get down and tracked him about 50 yards, and still really didn't know what I had by any means, but you spend your couple of minutes there just with the deer, and then I took a picture of it and probably ran the whole way back 800 yards back to my truck and called an uncle, and he came over and helped get it out. And it was cool that he was there and helped me get it out. And anyway, field dressed it and took it back to some buddy's house, and ended up going through and butchering the deer the rest of the way that night. And it was pretty cool. I mean, we were all just sitting around in awe of what it was, clueless of what it was. And it was probably the next day or two, I start going through trail camera pictures, and sure enough, I had a picture of that buck in April. I believe it was the 25th. I had two pictures of him, and looked like a small balloon growing out of one side, and the other side looked like the typical golf ball early size growth on it. And yeah, that was the only true history I had with it. I don't know if it lived on the neighbor's property or what, but it's a strange one.
Now, you or your friends really never had any kind of encounters with this deer before?
No, and nobody that I've talked to in the area had ever seen it. I kind of wonder if something happened last year as he shed, like there was some
Yeah,
pedicle damage, because the one pedicle was just incredible. I mean, it was over the first circumference isn't measured there, but if you were to go off what I would consider the burr, it was it was over 12 inches around on one side. I mean, it was just an absolute explosion on one side, and
it's
the other
insane,
side.
man. It's
It
insane. It
is, and
looks
I
like a
mean,
bush. I mean, it looks
it,
like a bush
that
of bone. That's the
that's probably the best way to describe it. And you talk to shed fanatics, and they're like, "You never found a shed," and it's like you wouldn't even know it was a shed if you saw it. You
yeah.
know, if
No,
that truly grew that way the year before. Which, like I said, the way he's so lopsided, I just believe that something happened. I mean, some sort of injury, and he didn't just grow that way every year.
at what point were you like, holy crap, dude, this is like this needs to be seen by the books. Like this is something special. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's maybe slightly embarrassing, but even that night, I didn't have a clue. And, we weren't even talking about record books. We were just in awe that you could count it 5 times, and every time you counted it, you'd count more points.
Yeah.
It's 67 points on that thing. And I mean, there's a handful that are not scoreable, that are not long enough. But I mean, we were just in awe. And it was honestly not until that Wednesday my boss had got back into town. He was out antelope hunting, and he hadn't seen it in person. I mean, he was in shock when he had seen pictures of it, but he was like, "Hey, I'll bring in my tape after lunch, and let's tape this up." And we taped it up,
Yeah. Good
and
luck.
yeah, I mean, it was all his expertise as far as and he still had lots of questions, like anybody would. But I mean, I was not knowledgeable enough to go about it, but we scored we scored it. I think we had like 340 something gross and 316 net or something like that. I mean, we added up the score sheet. I mean, if we're 67 points, I think it's like 85 measurements total with circumferences. I mean, there's a lot to it, but we added it up. And I mean, at that time, I was like, I don't know if I don't want to say I was less excited, but then it was like, oh God, you know, this is something way bigger than I ever imagined and would have thought. And it's like,
Well, and you can't wrap your mind around how many points there are and how I mean, you can't look at that deer and even begin to guess. You know what I mean?
yeah, it's mind boggling. And I mean, I'll be the first one to say that night that I shot it, I mean, I was thinking I had a 225-inch buck. I mean, and I was way off on that. But unless somebody's scored an animal like that, I don't think you're going to look at that and be anywhere in the range of a ballpark guess.
No, no. Well, I remember I got to be present at the Pope and Young panel when they measured it, and so how it works at panel is there's two teams of three that have to measure each animal, and it took both teams of three about 8 hours apiece to measure that thing. So you're talking 16 hours alone just at panel to confirm what the official measurement already was. And I mean,
Yeah.
so you're looking at 30 hours of measuring put into this one deer. And it's insane the amount of work they put into measuring that deer. What was the official score come out to be?
343 and 4/8 was the gross, and 321 and 3/8 is the net.
I understand like people you might hear that number and be like, wow, those you were quite a bit off. But that's not far off for an animal like that. I can promise you that. Because you could pick just a couple
Mm-hmm.
different points and go a couple different ways and be off that quick. So kudos to you guys because that's actually pretty stinking close.
Don't include me in that. It's Brian Crow, my boss. But I was just present and I was writing down numbers. Yeah.
So you're telling me we
But
were just talking about the October lull and you killed the number 2 archery deer in October.
October 11th, yeah. Yeah. And
So
I mean
listen,
it
people, be in the woods.
yeah. Yeah, be in the woods. Don't go to a gala and don't go to a softball bonfire.
Yeah. Shout out to your busters of friends who missed out on an opportunity. But listen, I heard a man tell me this one time in conversation about the lull. He said, well, just because it's October don't mean deer quit eating. It don't mean they quit drinking, and they still have to have somewhere to bed. So you can still hunt deer just as successfully in October as you can in September or November. You just have to change the way you hunt a little bit. And so for me, I really focus on cold fronts, and I really focus on trying to find water. Um, and if you do those two things, I mean, you can still find the deer in October. They still have to live. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're right about, keep it simple. Don't try to overcomplicate it and go to where, either you know where they're bedding, you know where they need to eat, or you know where they need to drink.
Yeah. Now, before we move on, I've got one of the newest sponsors of the show, and I have absolutely fallen in love with their platform. It is HuntWise. I absolutely love HuntWise for two reasons over other mapping services, and that is their Rutcast and their hunt predictions. Those have really, over the last 2 months, opened my eyes to a lot of things. Um, because you can, in one place, I can look at all my different tree stands and look at different winds and look at different barometric pressures and temperatures, and what stand's going to be the best. Or when I'm deciding between, do I go hunt Oklahoma this weekend or hunt Kansas this weekend, I can look at the predictions for the two and really help me decide where I should be hunting that set. And so it really helps me manage my time in the woods a whole lot better, even outside of the very very um, incredible maps they have. And obviously I could talk for forever about their 3D maps and how awesome that is. But
Let me jump in there real quick because believe it or not, that app was, I think it was brand new that year, but it was HuntWise app that I was looking at the week before on that cold front. And I was telling my buddies, I was like, it's a 5-star day. It's a first one, I think. And, trying to convince Luke that he needs to be out there hunting. And, he was telling me it was something else, but you're right. And the maps that they have and the way that they show the wind current or the wind drift, because you can put all your stands inside of there on the map and then see where the scent's going to be blowing. I think that's one of the greatest features.
absolutely. Now, listen, if Brian Butcher uses HuntWise, that's what I'm going to use too. So, guys, go check out HuntWise. You can use code HUNT101, all caps, HUNT101, and you'll get 20% off of HuntWise. But you have to do that online. Can't get that through the app because you can't put in a discount code. So go online to huntwise.com, code HUNT101, all caps, for 20% off. It is an incredible platform. You can test it out for 7 days free, and then that code will get you 20% off your total. And obviously, it works because Brian Butcher has the number 2 archery whitetail in the world because of HuntWise prediction. So go check them out. What has changed? We got to talk briefly a while back about just kind of the whirlwind of going to shows and traveling around with this deer after having harvested it. How's all that been, man?
It's fun, but it also kind of takes away from, that time away from family. And it's like, I'm kind of glad to be past some of that stuff in the sense that I don't have to allocate time towards that stuff. And it's fun and it's a blast, but it's an opportunity cost, and I'd much rather be in the woods.
You got to meet
I,
some pretty incredible
I mean,
people, though.
absolutely, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I mean, I'm lucky in that sense that I got to do it, and I got to do a lot of it with my buddies that I hunt with, and we had a blast. Met people we never would have met. Got to hear some good stories, and yeah, like I said, I wouldn't trade it for the world. But it's good to be past it, and be able to set my own priorities and not have any true obligations.
Who is the coolest person you got to meet?
Well, you, of course, but number 2 on that list.
Oh,
number no, man, Michael Waddell's cool as heck, if you ask me. That was pretty cool to meet him. Got to meet the one that got me first. So the first show I went to after this deer was the ATA show, and I showed up. I think it was Wednesday night. Got in like 2 in the morning. go down the next day and get set up in the booth, and everything's good, but it's still pretty slow and early. So we kind of take a walk, and we're just walking around the place. And I look over to the right and see Mark and Terry Drury. And I felt like a little girl at a concert in the sense that I couldn't hardly speak to him, but I asked him for a picture. And I mean, I was starstruck. That was the first time I'd ever met a celebrity in my eyes, if that makes any sense. I mean, that was the first hour of the ATA show, and the guys were just nice as can be. I'm embarrassed about it just because, like I said, I could barely even talk, but that was pretty cool. I mean, the list is probably endless, but yeah, it so many good opportunities.
You know, I'll say this: the first time I got starstruck, and I think it's just because the way I was raised. But man, I grew up in a house where my dad absolutely loved Chuck Adams. Uh, Everything about Chuck. You know, he shot a Hoyt because of Chuck. He shot Easton because of Chuck. I mean, he just loved Chuck. You know, read his book, saved his articles, and I'll never forget my phone rang and it said no caller ID. And at first I was like, stinking scammers, you know. But I answered it just off of a whim. I usually don't answer that kind of stuff. And I answered it, and he says, "Hey, is this Dylan?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "This is Chuck Adams." And I literally about fell up out my chair. And I was actually at my folks' house, and so I kicked my phone on speaker, and he kept talking, and my dad was flipping to the channel. He stops flipping, looks away from the TV, and looks at me, and his jaw drops.
Oh, I couldn't even imagine. Yeah. I was really hoping Chuck was going to make it to the convention. I've read his books and everybody's read his articles, and I mean, the man is a legend.
It was bad. You know, I understand his grandmother or his wife's grandmother, one of the two, she would, you know, go out and take care of her. But I've also got to hear from him, and you know how much he wanted to be at the convention, and but he'll be at the next one. So
yeah.
what is so what do you got for this fall?
You were breaking up, but I think you were asking about this fall.
Yeah, what do you got planned for this fall?
We've been out at least on a weekly basis, and just kind of watching things and trying to hunt a little bit. But yeah, this fall I'm just going to be staying around Kansas and chasing the whitetails. Buddy's got some property, family's got some, and I've got one buck that snuck through last year that I was after and found his shed in the spring, and really trying to target him. I haven't had a whole lot of pictures of him, but I feel like things are starting to break loose. The bucks are starting to get out of bachelor groups, and as the colder weather comes along, hopefully I'll get some daylight action with that guy. Man, I feel like I've been energized since that buck. And yeah, I know that I've never gone into the woods with any expectation of any score. I mean, you put it in the record book to honor the animal, to document it for history and for conservation's sake, but you don't put it in there to get your name in there, in my opinion. And so I'm not worried one bit about shooting a smaller buck. And I mean, I get the right 8-pointer to come in front of me, I'm going to be ecstatic.
Now, I don't ask this, and you know my heart behind it. I don't ask this in any kind of negative way. But I ask you because I really do. I have a young man who is struggling with it as well, and you would recognize the buck if I was to show you it was killed here in Wellington a few years back. But knowing that you may never kill a deer as big as the one you've killed already, how do you kind of keep the excitement behind the hunt? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel, like I said, I just feel more and more energized and excited. And man, this time of year I get a little bit giddy, and it's tough to concentrate at work. It's, trying to balance the home life and keeping the wife and kids happy, and, still trying to get out and do what you absolutely love.
I love it, man. No, I absolutely love that answer. Because if you're thinking that the record book is about you, you are sadly mistaken, my friend. The record book is to honor that animal. and to put it in with its peers and to show just how magnificent of an animal was harvested. And it doesn't have anything to do with you. And that's why I respect those guys. I have friends of mine who put their initials in or just their last name, and they don't want the recognition, but they still want their animal to be recognized amongst their peers, and that's what
Yeah.
it's all about.
Yeah.
And so I absolutely love that answer. Now, before I ask you this next question, I was absolutely ecstatic today. Somebody reached out and said, "Hey, man, I've been listening to the podcast, and I love the tips that your guests give and that you give." And he said, "I took to heart your advice on peeing from your tree stand." And I'm like, "Good." And I responded back, laughing face, "That's awesome." And he said, "I pee out of my tree stand as much as I can now," and I just sent like laughing faces. And then like 5 minutes later, he sent me a picture of a buck that was dead. And he said, "Yeah, I shot this minutes after peeing from my tree stand." And I'm like, "Bingo, dude. That's what it's all about." So guys, I would highly encourage you, if you listen to this podcast, send me your success photos. I love to see them. I love to see success and be able to share in your excitement of your success. If you have any tips and tricks of your own, please feel free to send them over to me. Instagram at average_sportsman, or email them to me at the hunting 101 podcast at gmail.com. I would love to hear your tips and tricks, but I also love to hear from my guests their tips and tricks. So Brian, if you've learned one little tip or trick over the years that I can take and put in my back pocket, what would it be?
Everybody knows kind of the basics, and the wind is probably the biggest challenge for a hunter, in my opinion, especially when it can change. And you know, we talked about on the Pope and Young podcast as far as what's the one thing you take in your pocket, and that was before hunting season. And I kind of realized as hunting season's going on, the one thing that I've been doing every hunt this year, and I've done it in years past, but as I walk past a cedar tree, I'm breaking off a few limbs and putting those in my pocket, just as, maybe it's a gimmick, maybe it has nothing to do with anything, but I just feel like getting some true natural scent, is you get it on your hands, you get it, put it in your pockets, that sort of thing. Um, Anything to help with your scent is all I would say. Yeah, and
I love
the peeing out of the stand, I probably pee more in the scrapes than out of my stand if I can, make it to my scrape. But yeah, and maybe it was one of yours, but somebody was saying that urine's like 85% ammonia. Same thing with deer.
Yeah. No, I years back I heard that put out by at the time it was, now it's the NDA, National Deer Association.
Oh, QDMA.
Um QDMA, which now of course is the NDA, but they put out an article saying that 85% of your pee is ammonia, and then within a matter of minutes it's 100% ammonia, which is the same as deer. So within a matter of minutes, all they smell is urine. They
Mm-hmm.
don't know that it came from you. All they smell is urine. And so, yeah, man, again, gimmick as it might be, I don't know. But I've had deer where I truly believe they came in because they heard me peeing, like they heard it hitting the ground,
Yeah.
and it sounded like a deer peeing. And again, gimmick as it might be, but I'm also a believer in, and like you said, um, breaking off limbs, and I'd rub it on my pants, I'd rub it on my shirt.
Yeah.
My dad actually will take and brush around the shooting rail of his tree stand, in cedar, and that's how he puts cedar all around the shooting rail of his. He'll zip tie limbs around the shooting rail of his tree stand.
Mm-hmm. And not to say that products aren't good by any means, but man, how can you beat natural scent versus something that's not in their environment? I mean, I just feel like that's the best thing you can do.
It's a great tip, my friend. It really is, and I believe it's not only. I don't believe it's gimmick. I believe it's proven. Um, over and over and over again. Because they used to not have products, and guys used to store their totes with cedar in them, and used to put their clothes in trash bags with cedar in them, and that's what they used as cover up.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe time tested and proven. So great tip, man. And I do believe that there's people out there who might not have ever tried it. And again, I stay as scent free as possible. I wash my clothes, and I run a scent lock ozone bag, and I spray down before I go in. But I'm just like Brian. I will always grab that and rub it on my hands. Um, and rub it on my clothes. I rub it on my boots. I rub it. I'll rub it on my backpack, on my bino harness. I can't say that I put it in my pockets, but I will certainly start because, well, heck, if Brian Butcher does it, it works.
Yeah. Well, hopefully a listener calls in and has success with that.
Absolutely, guys. If you try that and you find that you find success with it, let us know, man. That made my day when somebody said, "Hey, I took your advice and it worked." That meant everything in the world to me. So shout out to Jeremy for sending that in to me because that was just awesome. Made my day. Before we go, I do got to give a quick thank you to our friends over at NZ Campers. They are purpose-built campers by hunters for hunters. They are phenomenal. Did you get to see one at convention?
Oh yeah, we were all drooling over it, and I mean, sitting there contemplating who's buying it. It.
Oh man, they are amazing. They have so many features built in for hunters with boot dryers and meat storage and scent-free cabinets and from what I've been told, I think they're going to start offering the scent lock ozone closet in the builds, which I mean that's just incredible. So guys, go check out NZ Campers because they are phenomenal and they are built to do what they're built to do, and that's hunt and go out and get in the woods and be successful in the woods. So go check out NZ Campers, guys. Brian, thank you so much for coming on. It was a real pleasure. It was a pleasure to get to meet you at convention. Congrats on an incredible deer. I know it was a couple years back, but congrats on an incredible deer, man.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure talking with you, and hopefully, we'll be talking about successes after this season.
Yes, we still need to get together, man, and shoot bows and have a cookout or
Yeah.
something. I would absolutely love that, and love to get to just hang out and
Yeah.
talk hunting with you. But guys, thank you so much for listening. You guys have a great week and good luck this fall. Make sure and send those success photos in. Make sure and send those field notes in and those tips and tricks that you have that I could share with the listeners. Y'all have a great week and good luck this fall.
Thanks, Dylan.